When I returned from my business trip, I walked into what looked like a stranger's house. My furniture? Gone. My photos? Gone. My walls were painted a hideous beige. And standing in the middle of my living room was my daughter-in-law, Jessica, with her arms crossed and a smug little smirk. "Oh, you're back early," she said. "Hope you don't mind, I remodeled. My parents will live here with you now. Easier to have all the dead weight under one roof." I smiled because Jessica didn't know it yet, but she just remodeled herself into a criminal record. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're tuning in from. I love hearing your stories too. I'm Ellen Smith. Most people just call me Ellen. I'm 60, a retired civil engineer, and someone who thought she'd seen everything life could throw at her. But nothing could have prepared me for the day I walked into my own home and realized my son's wife had decided to erase me, literally. Let me take you back to how it all began, with one innocent business trip and a betrayal that turned my world upside down. I've always been independent. Maybe that's why my son Mark married someone like Jessica. She's the kind of woman who always has a camera-ready smile, perfect nails, and a tone that makes even compliments sound like insults. When Mark brought her home for the first time, I remember thinking, she's beautiful, but there's something behind those eyes, something cold. Still, I wanted to believe she'd make my son happy. For years, I gave them space. I never meddled, never asked for help. I worked my whole life as a civil engineer, managing sites and projects, often away for days at a time. So when I took on a short consultancy trip for a client in Chicago, it was nothing unusual. Before I left, I gave Mark my spare keys, just in case of emergencies. "Don't worry, Mom," he said, laughing. "We'll keep an eye on the place." I smiled and left, not realizing I was handing the keys to my own nightmare. The trip went smoothly. 3 weeks, quick meetings, good pay. But when I came home, something felt off before I even turned the key. The doormat was gone. The flower pots I'd kept by the door for years, gone. Even the smell of my house felt different, artificial, like one of those cheap hotel air fresheners trying to hide something rotten. I opened the door and froze. My antique oak furniture, the pieces my late husband built, replaced with cheap, glossy, modern junk. My framed photos, replaced with pictures of Jessica's parents smiling in front of their house. And there, standing proudly in the middle of my living room, was Jessica. "Oh, Ellen," she exclaimed, pretending to be surprised. "You're home early. We didn't think you'd be back till next week." I blinked. "We?" That's when her parents emerged from my kitchen, holding wine glasses, like they owned the place. Jessica smiled sweetly. "Mom, Dad, this is Ellen. She'll be living with us now. Isn't that wonderful?" I stood there, speechless. "Living with you?" Jessica's tone turned syrupy, but her eyes gleamed with condescension. Mark and I decided it's best if you have company. Plus, my parents needed a place to stay while they renovate their home. It's just temporary." I felt my stomach twist. My late husband's house, the home we'd built together, was now full of strangers, and my son had apparently approved it. I asked where Mark was. "Oh, he's away on business," Jessica said a little too quickly. Then she smiled wider. "Don't worry, Ellen. We'll take good care of things." That night, I barely slept. Everywhere I looked, I saw intrusions. Jessica's perfume in my bedroom, her mother's robe hanging in my bathroom, even her father watching sports on my couch with his feet up like he owned the place. I called Mark 3 times. No answer. The 4th time, he finally picked up. "Mom, can we talk later? I'm in the middle of something," he said. His tone rushed. "Mark," I said slowly, "why are there strangers living in my home?" He sighed. "Mom, Jessica's parents are family too. They just needed somewhere to stay for a while. You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I repeated. "They've redecorated my house." "Jessica said you offered," he said. That was the moment my heart cracked. He believed her. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back.
But I didn't cry. I didn't shout. Instead, I poured myself a cup of tea, sat down, and started planning. Jessica had turned my home into her little kingdom. She thought I was too old, too soft, too sentimental to fight back. But what she didn't know was that I never left a project without documentation. I had cameras, I had legal records, and most importantly, I had patience. Because when the police showed up at my door an hour later, Jessica's smug little empire started to crumble faster than she ever imagined.
When the police arrived, Jessica's face turned the color of paper. She'd been mid-sentence, bragging to her parents about how she'd finally convinced Mark's mom to let go of the past, when the sound of the doorbell interrupted her smug laughter. 2 uniformed officers stood outside, polite but firm. "Mrs. Ellen Smith?" one asked. I stepped forward before Jessica could open her mouth. "Yes, officer, that's me." He nodded. "We received a report about a potential illegal occupancy. Mind if we take a look around?" Jessica's jaw nearly hit the floor. "Wait, what? Illegal occupancy? That's ridiculous." The officer held up a clipboard. "We just need to verify some details. Ma'am, could you show us proof of ownership?" I smiled. "Gladly." I walked to the study, my study, and pulled open the bottom drawer where my house deed had sat untouched for years. My name, my signature, my property. Jessica looked like she wanted to lunge across the room and snatch the paper out of my hand. Her father, meanwhile, shifted uneasily. Her mother started whispering something under her breath. The officers reviewed the document and nodded. "All right, that clears that up. And these people?" He gestured toward Jessica and her parents. "They're guests," Jessica said quickly. "Family guests." The officer turned to me. "Is that true, ma'am?" I met his eyes. Calm, controlled. "Not exactly. I went on a 3-week business trip and came home to find my house remodeled and my possessions removed without consent." That was all it took. The officers' professional smiles tightened. They asked to inspect the house. While they walked around, Jessica whispered furiously at me. "What are you doing, Ellen? You're embarrassing yourself." I turned to her slowly, the faintest smile on my lips. "No, dear, I'm documenting." When the police came back, they had questions. "Mrs. Smith," one said carefully, "did you authorize these renovations?" "Of course not. I left my home in perfect condition." Jessica jumped in. "She's lying. Mark told me I could handle everything while she was gone. He wanted it to feel more like our home." The officer frowned. "Ma'am, without the owner's written consent, any structural or decorative changes constitute property damage and trespassing. You'll need to provide documentation if that's the case." Jessica's mouth opened, but no words came out. I folded my arms. "I'll be filing an official report, officers. But first, I'd like them out of my home." Her father's voice finally broke through the silence. "This is absurd. You can't just throw us out like dogs." "Oh, I can. Because this is my house. You were never invited." The officers gave them 15 minutes to gather their things. 15 glorious minutes. Jessica stormed around, hissing at her parents to pack up. Her mother sobbed into a designer shawl while her father muttered curses. Jessica turned back to me once, face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this, Ellen. You'll regret this." I tilted my head. "I don't think so, sweetheart. You see, I recorded everything." Her eyes widened. "You what?" I pointed at the ceiling corner. A discreet little black camera lens blinked red. Jessica paled. "Smile for the footage," I said. "It's time-stamped, geotagged, and already uploaded to a secure drive. I told you I'd document everything." Her fury melted into panic. "You can't do this." "Oh, but I already did." When they finally left, the silence in my house felt heavier than ever. I walked through every room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture that was still mine, and the few personal things Jessica hadn't destroyed. Then I sat on the couch, her couch technically, and let out a long, tired sigh. She'd turned my sanctuary into her playground, but now she'd handed me ammunition. That night, I stayed up till dawn. I emailed the footage to my lawyer, a friend from my engineering firm days, named Patricia. Patricia called me back within minutes. "Ellen," she said, voice sharp, "this is serious. Unauthorized renovation, property destruction, possible fraud if she used your address for any legal or financial purposes. We're going to make her wish she'd never picked up a paintbrush." I smiled for the first time in days. Good. I want to do this by the book.
By morning, I was on my porch drinking coffee when Mark finally called. "Mom, what the hell did you do? Jessica said the police threw her and her parents out of our house." I exhaled slowly. "Our house?" "Yeah, she said I cut him off." "Mark, let me stop you right there. It's my house. Your name isn't on the deed, nor is hers. And before you embarrass yourself, maybe you should ask Jessica why the police were here in the first place." There was silence on the other end. Then a hesitant, "What do you mean?" I smiled. "Let her tell you. I'll wait." He hung up. I didn't hear from him for 3 days. When he finally showed up at my door, he looked like a man who'd aged 10 years. "Mom," he said quietly, I saw the footage." I nodded. "And?" His voice cracked. I didn't know. She told me you'd asked her to fix up the house, that you were getting too old to keep it up. I believed her." I stared at him for a long moment. "That's the problem, Mark. You believed her, not me." He dropped his head. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am." For a brief moment, I saw the little boy who used to bring me daisies from the yard. My heart softened, just a bit. But forgiveness? That would take some time. That night, I made a decision. Jessica thought she'd humiliated me. But now, she was going to learn what true humiliation felt like. Slow, quiet, and completely legal. Because while she was busy repainting my walls, she forgot one thing. I was still the engineer who built the foundation beneath them. And I was about to make her entire world collapse, from the paperwork up. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through curtains that weren't mine. Cheap polyester lace instead of the thick velvet I'd bought years ago. My house didn't even smell like my house anymore. Instead of the faint lavender scent from my diffuser, there was the heavy, greasy smell of someone else's cooking. It felt like waking up in a stranger's home, except this stranger had stolen mine. Jessica was already in the kitchen when I walked in. She was humming, wearing one of my aprons, flipping pancakes like she owned the place. The casual way she glanced over her shoulder at me like I was the guest made my blood boil. "Morning, Ellen," she said cheerfully. "I made breakfast. You'll love it." I didn't move. My voice came out flat. "Where's Michael?" "Oh, he had to run some errands. You know how busy he gets."
She smiled wider, stacking pancakes on plates for her parents, who were also sitting at my dining table eating from my china. We've decided it's best if you let us handle things around here for a while. You've been working so hard, and honestly, she leaned closer, lowering her voice, you're getting older, Ellen. You should rest. I couldn't even respond. My own son's wife was standing in my kitchen, using my plates, and telling me that I needed to step aside. For a long, painful moment, I stood there watching her parents laugh as if they'd lived here forever. That's when I noticed the framed family photos on the wall, my photos, replaced with pictures of them, her family, smiling, happy, and my living room. Something inside me cracked. I didn't shout, I didn't throw them out. I simply said, "Enjoy your breakfast," and walked out the door. But while they thought I was going for a walk to cool down, I was actually heading for my lawyer's office. The lawyer visit. My lawyer, Peter, had been my friend for years. He handled the sale of my late husband's business and knew every detail of my property ownership. When I explained what had happened, he looked at me over his glasses, eyebrows raised. "Wait," he said slowly. "You're saying your daughter-in-law remodeled your home without permission, moved her parents in, and told you it's their house now?" I nodded. Peter leaned back in his chair and gave a low whistle. "Ellen, you own that property outright, yes?" "Completely. Paid off 15 years ago." He smiled, the kind of smile that meant something interesting was about to happen. He pulled up my house's title documents and scrolled through some legal forms. "They can't make any structural changes without your written consent. If they've done any remodeling, plumbing, wiring, even wall paint without approval, they've violated the housing code. And if they've used your address for residency without permission, that's another infraction." I blinked. "So I can get them out?" "Not only that," he said, "you can file for damages and property misuse. Let's just say Jessica's makeover might cost her more than new wallpaper." I left his office with a plan, and for the first time in days, a smile on my face. The quiet setup. Back home, Jessica and her parents were gone, probably out shopping or showing off their new home. That gave me time to take photos of everything. The walls, the kitchen, the new appliances she'd installed. Then I called a housing inspector Peter recommended. When the inspector arrived, he took one look around and frowned. "Did they mess with the wiring?" he asked, pointing to exposed cables near the stove. I nodded. "Yeah," he said. "This is all illegal and dangerous." He wrote up a full report, complete with photos and violations, a report I quietly sent to the city housing department and to Peter. The next morning, I went back to my routine, as if nothing had happened. I even smiled politely when Jessica walked in with shopping bags, her parents trailing behind her like they owned the place. "Good news," she said brightly. "We're almost done fixing up the guest rooms. My parents want to contribute to the renovation fund." I smiled. "That's generous." What I didn't tell her was that the renovation fund she mentioned would soon be the evidence that brought her world crashing down. The fall begins. 2 days later, I was sitting in the garden reading when 2 police cars pulled up to the driveway. Jessica was in the kitchen when they knocked, and I'll never forget the look on her face as the officers stepped inside. "Mrs. Jessica Reynolds?" one asked. "Yes," she stammered. "We're here regarding reports of unauthorized construction and residency violations at this property." Her face went pale. "What? What do you mean? This is my home." The officer looked at his clipboard. "According to the deed, the property belongs solely to Ellen Smith. Are you aware that remodeling without the owner's consent is illegal under state law?" Jessica turned to me, her smile gone. "Ellen, you didn't—" I stood up, calm as ever. "You said you wanted to handle things around here, Jessica. I'm just letting the authorities help you with that." Her parents started whispering frantically. The police continued, explaining the list of violations, including unlicensed electrical work and false residency claims. When they read the possible fines aloud, Jessica's knees nearly buckled. They didn't arrest her, not yet, but they did issue her a summons and warned that a full investigation was underway. As they left, Jessica turned to me with tears in her eyes. "You can't do this to me." I tilted my head. "I didn't do anything. You did." That night, I watched from my bedroom window as she and her parents packed up boxes. For once, her sweet little smile was gone. Michael came home late, exhausted, clearly unaware of the chaos. When Jessica tried to spin her story, claiming I'd turned on her, I handed him the city's inspection reports and the police citation. He read in silence. His hands trembled slightly. Then he whispered, "Jess, what did you do?" She tried to grab his arm, pleading, but he pulled away. "You endangered my mother's home, my family's home. Do you realize how serious this is?" Jessica's tears turned to rage. "She's manipulating you, Michael. She's always hated me." But this time, he didn't believe her. He turned to me, voice low. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." I just smiled. "I know, son, but now you do." That night, as Jessica's parents drove away with their suitcases and Jessica herself locked herself in the guest room to cry, I sat by the fireplace, my fireplace, sipping tea. For the first time in weeks, the house felt like mine again. But I wasn't done yet. Jessica had cost me peace, dignity, and safety. She'd used my home as her stage, and I was going to make sure that when the curtain finally fell, she'd have nothing left to stand on. The morning the inspector returned with a full enforcement officer felt oddly bright, the kind of sun that makes everything brutally clear. The inspector had handed the housing department my file, and they'd sent someone to follow up. They didn't bother with soft warnings. The law moves in straight lines. It does not negotiate with entitlement. A woman in a Navy uniform arrived with a stern face and an official badge. She introduced herself and asked me to sign a statement. Her presence made everything feel heavier, more real. I signed without drama. I had the patience of a woman who knows her foundations are solid. "Ma'am," she said, flipping through the report, "there's been unauthorized structural work, unlicensed electrical rewiring, and a number of safety issues that put the occupants at risk. The code violations are severe. We'll need to seal off any unsafe areas immediately, and a formal citation will be filed." Her eyes were kind but resolved, like a judge who feels for both sides but must apply the law. Jessica arrived in a cloud of perfume and panic an hour later, hands trembling as if she'd been running. She had her phone out already filming, probably intended for some social media sympathy play. She tried to put on her practiced smile when she saw the officer. "This is outrageous," she said, voice high. "My in-laws and I are homeowners here. Ellen invited us. She asked us to make it comfortable." Her words were practiced. I recognized the cadence of someone used to spinning. The officer didn't flinch. "Miss Reynolds, the deeds say otherwise. We have an inspector's report and eyewitness testimony that the homeowner did not authorize these renovations. We also have evidence of unlicensed electrical work. For safety's sake, we'll need to access the wiring in the kitchen area immediately." Jessica's face went a peculiar shade of white. She tried to call Mark. No answer. Of course, he was unreachable. He was still trying to stitch together the version of reality she'd sold him. While the officer walked through the rooms with clipboard in hand, documenting each violation, I noticed something in the corner of the study, a small pile of invoices, half-paid contractor bills, and a stack of glossy brochures from a so-called interior design consultant. Jessica had been meticulous about appearances, but sloppy about paperwork. She thought no one would look past the paint and the new cabinet handles. I took a step closer and my fingers brushed the top invoice. Reynolds Interiors, tendered by a shell company with a P.O. box and a name that matched one of Jessica's friends back home. There were deposits taken in cash and checks made out to names that didn't belong to licensed contractors. A slow, dangerous smile crept across my face. She hadn't just redecorated, she'd set up a network that milked renovations for kickbacks and falsified receipts, and she'd used my house as the front. That explained the donations she'd promised to make to the renovation fund. It explained the cheap materials masquerading as bespoke fixtures and the exposed wiring hidden behind cosmetic panels. It explained the faint sense of being used that had sat in my bones since I'd walked in. The enforcement officer called a halt to the inspection and exchanged a look with the inspector. "Ms. Reynolds," she said quietly, "because of the unlicensed work and the safety hazards, we must issue an immediate cease and desist on further renovations, proceed with an administrative hearing, and recommend a full audit of contracting entities involved. We'll also notify Consumer Protection. If there's evidence of fraud, that will escalate things considerably." I felt the room tilt for a moment, as if reality was being re-centered. Jessica's parents began to mutter, the polite veneer cracking into terror. Her father, always smug, started rummaging through his wallet for receipts, then faltered, unable to find anything that looked legitimate. By afternoon, the village was humming. Neighbors who had pretended not to notice the comings and goings of tradesmen were suddenly interested. A delivery driver stopped by with more paperwork than gossip. One of the young lads from the hardware store recognized the subcontractor name and told the enforcement officer that the firm had left half a job in another nearby town unpaid. The Consumer Protection Unit, I would later learn, moved fast once they saw the pattern. They uncovered a trail. Reynolds Interiors used the same set of phony subcontractors across 3 towns. Case files from a nearby county flagged similar complaints: shoddy work, missing payments, and suspicious cash flows into an account that traced back to a business card with Jessica's sister's name on it. The air smelled less like perfume now and more like cigarettes and panic. That night, Mark finally came home. He'd been called in at work and had read a terse, sober email from his bank about some unusual account activity linked to the renovation payments. When he stepped through my front door, he looked smaller than I had remembered. He avoided Jessica's gaze the way you avoid broken glass. "Mom," he said, voice thin, "what is happening?" He tried to look angry, to put on that protective son posture, but it faltered under the weight of facts. I handed him a folder: invoices, the inspector's report, the housing department's citation, emails that tied payments to the Reynolds account. He flipped through the pages with shaking hands. "Jess?" he asked, turning toward my daughter-in-law. Jessica's lips had drained of color. She stammered something about misunderstandings and good intentions, about helping the family and making the home cozy. Her script was unraveling with every passing second. Mark's face went slack with betrayal. "You told me Mom asked you to do this," he said, not a question but a crushing statement. "You did," Jessica began, one of the rare moments where she sounded small. "No," I said, quietly. "I didn't. I was out of town. You moved in. You claimed permission. You used my home as your scheme." My words were even, but my chest felt like a drum. There's a peculiar moment in these scenes where you watch your child really see you for the first time. Not the mom of childhood nostalgia, not the complaint you are used to hearing, but the adult who has rights and history and dignity. Mark's eyes filled not with the boy who brought me daisies, but with the man who now saw his wife and the mess she'd made. He said, "I don't know what to say." I told him, "Start with the truth." The next week brought legal letters.
My lawyer, Patricia, moved with machine-like calm, filing for damages, notifying consumer protection, and turning over evidence to the housing department. She also filed an injunction. No one would reside in the property pending investigation. That meant Jessica and her parents would have to find another place to stay immediately. That meant Mark would have to answer questions at work about his association with the contractors. That meant the village would talk, and talk they did. What I hadn't planned for and yet welcomed was the role of the neighbors, those who had nodded politely at the new paint and smiled when Jessica invited them to a housewarming, saw the inspector's tape, and whispered. People began to call with information. A driver who'd been paid heavily in cash to drop off tools late at night. A neighbor who'd seen a van cart away a pile of perfectly good kitchen units at dawn. A contractor who'd been stiffed and wanted justice. Their statements became a chorus, and the authorities listened. By the time Consumer Protection brought its first set of formal complaints, the Reynolds network looked amateur in the cold light of scrutiny. Their cash trail was messy, the shell companies thinly disguised. Banks cooperated. The financial picture that had supported Jessica's small empire collapsed in a single week.
I won't pretend I enjoyed every moment. Revenge is not a party. It's paperwork and waiting and answering questions about your private life to strangers. There were nights I woke up thinking of my husband and the years of small kindnesses that built our home, and I felt guilty for turning this into a fight. But the guilty feelings never lasted long. Jessica had weaponized my home for gain and comfort. She had humiliated me in my own rooms. She had used Mark's affection as a shield. That had to end. When the final notices came, demands for restitution, threats of liens on Reynolds interiors, and a county-level investigation into fraudulent contracting, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. The last thing I did before bed that night was walk around my home, touching the banister, the frames, the places that remembered real laughter. My house had been violated, yes, but law and truth had their own slow, steady repair. The following morning, Mark left to sort out his career fallout. He kissed my hand briefly and for the first time said, "I'm sorry, Mom, I'll help fix it." He stayed the weekend, painting, fixing, calling contractors who were licensed and reputable. We laughed once or twice over the absurdity of it all, and it felt like family again for the first time in months. As for Jessica, she packed in a rage that was both petulant and terrified. She left with her parents, their faces hollowed by the cost of exposure. The village watched. People who'd once tolerated her smile now avoided her. There's a terrible civic justice in small towns. Reputations are carved slowly and erased painfully. I didn't revel in her ruin. I reveled in the restoration of what was mine, not merely the house, but the dignity of knowing my home belonged to me, and to the memory of a life my husband and I had built. I had used knowledge, patience, and law, nothing crude, nothing illegal, to remove the rot from my door. That night, as I lit the lamp in my restored living room and Mark handed me a cup of tea he'd made, I realized something simple. Revenge can be quiet and yet final. It can be the steady work of putting into place the right documents, the right calls, the right witnesses. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to break to be strong. And in the silence that followed, with the house humming its old welcome, I felt something like peace settle over me. The walls had not only stopped shaking, they had begun to mend. The morning it all officially ended didn't come with fireworks. It came with a knock at the door. Firm, measured, the kind of knock that carries authority. I opened it to find two county investigators standing there, polite but expressionless. "Mrs. Smith, we're here about the complaint involving the Reynolds contracting group," one of them said. I offered them coffee. They smiled, declined, and handed me a sealed document instead. It was a formal notice of resolution. The county had completed its investigation. The words on that paper made me sit down slowly. Jessica Reynolds, my daughter-in-law, had been found guilty of operating an unlicensed contracting scheme, falsifying documents, and using my address as a fraudulent business registration site. She faced criminal charges, fines, and restitution orders. And the best part? All the illegal renovation work had to be undone at her expense. It took everything in me not to smile. I'd been calm through everything, but seeing justice written in black ink felt like oxygen filling my lungs for the first time in years. When the news broke around the neighborhood, people reacted exactly as I expected. The same neighbors who used to gossip about the poor old widow letting her son's wife take charge suddenly came over with baked goods and sympathy. One woman, Ruth, whispered, "Ellen, you handled it like a queen. I don't think I could have done it with such grace." I laughed softly. Grace, I said, is just what patience looks like from the outside. Truthfully, patience had been my weapon all along. I didn't yell, I didn't break down, I didn't stoop to Jessica's level. I simply kept receipts, records, and a calm face. And when the time came, I let the law speak for me.
A few weeks later, Mark came by alone. He looked 10 years older, like he'd aged through every sleepless night he'd had to endure. He sat on the porch, staring out at the lake. "She's gone," he said quietly. "The divorce papers were filed last week." He sounded broken, not angry, not bitter, just hollow. I placed a cup of coffee in his hands. "I didn't want to believe her capable of that," he murmured. "You always told me to look deeper." "I didn't. I just wanted peace." "You wanted the kind of peace that comes from pretending everything's fine. That's not peace, sweetheart. That's surrender." He nodded, eyes shining. "You were right, Mom. About everything." There was no pride in me when I heard that, only quiet relief. He looked at the house, freshly repaired, stripped back to its bones, and whispered, "It feels like home again." I smiled faintly. "That's because it's built on truth this time." In the months that followed, my home slowly transformed, not with Jessica's fake modern luxury, but with warmth. Real, human warmth. Mark began helping me restore it the way it used to be. Painting the walls with the same soft cream my late husband loved, replanting roses in the garden, even fixing the creaky stairs we'd both complained about for years. He told me about therapy, how he was trying to rebuild his life, not just his career. He admitted that Jessica's control had crept into everything, their finances, friendships, and even his confidence. She'd made him doubt his instincts, just as she'd tried to make me doubt mine. But seeing me fight back, quietly, intelligently, and without hatred, had changed something in him. "Mom," he said one night, sanding a doorframe, "I want to be more like you when I'm old." I chuckled. "You mean stubborn and opinionated?" He laughed for the first time in months. "No, steady, unbreakable." Then came something unexpected. The house that Jessica's parents had mortgaged to fund her business ventures was repossessed. They'd used fraudulent income statements to secure the loan, and once the investigation tied everything together, their finances crumbled. And though I didn't celebrate their ruin, I won't lie. There was a grim satisfaction in knowing karma had taken its time, but arrived right on schedule. Jessica herself? She fled to her sister's place upstate, dodging reporters and lawsuits. Her luxury home decor social media accounts went dark. And when she was finally sentenced to community service and ordered to repay restitution, the headlines were almost poetic. Influencer designer exposed. Luxury scam built on lies. I saved that newspaper clipping, not out of spite, but as proof that truth, no matter how long buried, always rises. Mark eventually moved back in for a while, not out of pity,
but to reconnect. We found a quiet rhythm again, Sunday breakfasts, walks by the lake, and sometimes silence, the kind that feels like healing. One evening, as we sat outside watching the sunset, he said something that stopped me cold. "Mom, I know you didn't do this for revenge." I looked at him. "Didn't I?" He smiled. "No, you did it for self-respect. There's a difference." That night, when he went to bed, I walked through my home one last time before turning out the lights. The smell of old pine and fresh paint filled the air, and in the soft quiet of my restored living room, I finally allowed myself to exhale, fully, deeply, freely. I wasn't just reclaiming a house, I was reclaiming my story. A few months later, I received a letter from the housing board, a commendation for assisting in uncovering a major fraudulent network. They called me instrumental in exposing a large-scale contracting scam that saved homeowners thousands. It was framed in simple paper, but to me, it was more valuable than any luxury renovation. And as I placed that letter on the mantel, next to my husband's photograph, I whispered,
"We did it, love. Our home is ours again." He would have laughed, I think, told me that I always did know how to turn a bad situation into a lesson. The story spread beyond our little town. People started calling me the lady who caught the fake designer. A journalist even asked if I'd do an interview. I declined. Because the truth is, my satisfaction wasn't in headlines or gossip. It was in silence. The silence of peace, of a home where every sound, a creaking floorboard, a whistling kettle, the chirping outside my window, belonged to me. A year later, on my 63rd birthday, Mark gave me a small gift box. Inside was a brass key, engraved with 2 words, "New Beginnings." He'd bought a small cottage nearby, not for me, but with me. We'd share the land, the garden, the laughter. For once, I cried, not from pain, but from gratitude. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't what you destroy. It's what you rebuild stronger, freer, and wiser than before. If you're watching this and someone has ever tried to take what's yours, remember Ellen's story. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. And when the moment comes, let your truth speak louder than any revenge ever could. Subscribe for more real stories like this and tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Jessica or done exactly what Ellen did?